Next, we have our workshop. And there's no public input on this. This is for the board to do its own discussion. So we have, I think, 2 zoning amendments that are being proposed by staff. So we will proceed with staff can input to us. And I think the first one we'll have is the Performance Overlay District. That is both on Route 102 and Route 28. And those were enacted back in 2002. And at that time, times were definitely different. There was a concern about big box stores. And this was intended to keep the more of a, like a local tree canopy, setback, colonial-looking type of setup. And the intent was for it to be temporary. Well, of course, anything with government is temporary becomes permanent. So here we are, 20 years later, discussing something that's going to be temporary. And I think the way times are now, it got to the point where it's hindering what we want to develop. So I will turn it over to Kelly. There's more history on this, but I don't want to bore anyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this evening we'll actually be going over 3 zoning amendments, but I'll certainly take up the overlays first, if that's
Yes.
the will of the board. So just to provide some brief history, you've done a nice job already, Mr. Chair, but these overlay districts, that is the Route 102 and 28 performance overlay districts, were first adopted in 2002. The intent at that time was to assist with keeping these corridors first in alignment with, again, at that time, the 1997 master plan, as well as keeping management of the growth during that time period. So big box stores were looking to come in to both the 28 area and 102 area. We also had the widening of I-93 at that time. And so really the town was looking to navigate what that development was going to do. And so they had the overlay districts put in place. Most recently, in 2019, previous planning staff brought forward a proposal to remove these overlay districts. However, that proposal included an additional commercial performance overlay that never actually came to fruition as an amendment, and so it never was adopted. So that brings us to today, and right now we're looking to discuss with the board the complete removal of the Route 28 and Route 102 overlay districts. As the board's aware, we've experienced significant growth since 2002 and since that 1997 master plan was put in place. And in fact, we operate under a new master plan, the 2013 plan, which actually identifies both of these overlay district areas as retrofit growth sectors, which specifically talks about already developed areas essentially being redeveloped. So in other words, right now we're in the redevelopment stages of these corridors. In your packets, I provided some detailed information about present development along 102 and 28, as well as some detailed information about the true impacts to each individual parcel throughout both corridors. Again, this is intended to be a discussion with the board this evening. I'm happy to walk through that document with you if you think that would be helpful, or if you've reviewed it and you have questions, I'm happy to do that as well.
How's the board feel? I'd like to have staff go through it. Yeah, I'm getting some nods. Yes. Yes, Kelly.
I mean, we can go right to questions if you want. I don't care.
I think there's some members that want to hear from Kelly.
Okay. So just to cover the allowed uses, this is with respect to the 102 overlay district. So right now, the allowed uses are business center development, professional offices, restaurants, cafes, retail, educational institutions, and recreational areas and assisted living facilities. The map that I have up on the screen now, obviously shows you the 102 corridor, and then again, the specific parcels within that corridor in the overlay district. So not every parcel along 102 is actually in this overlay district. It's these specifically identified parcels. Within that corridor, there are multiple zoning districts underneath that performance overlay. That includes C1, C2, C3 in the industrial 2 zone. So if we remove the overlay district, the underlying zoning would be the zoning for that area, for the parcels. That would not change. The table 1 in the packet of information goes over, again, the allowed uses within the 102 overlay district, whether that be permitted by right, permitted by conditional use, or by special exception. This is more of just a visual of what I highlighted as permitted uses earlier. So we used our GIS to help visualize kind of the development that's occurred, and then try to assess what potential redevelopment could occur within both of these corridors. So 10 lots, again, this is a 102 overlay, were identified to be undeveloped, and the total area of those parcels is 31.3 acres. The zoning districts within that acreage is residential and commercial, both C1, C2, and C3. An additional 15 lots for a total of 238 acres across 5 different zoning districts were determined to be underutilized in some way. So that's a good indication of what these overlay districts are impacting. So basically, we have a significant amount of land that's being underutilized as a result of the overlay districts. And stop me at any time if you have questions. I don't want to.
Any questions at this point? No? Looks, everyone is content so far and understanding.
So the 28 overlay district, so now we're in the north part of town, consists of the commercial 1 and 2 districts, the agricultural residential district, and the multifamily residential district. So again, when we remove that overlay district, these would be the zoning districts that remain. So it falls to the underlying zoning. Same concept for the table. These are, again, the zoning districts that would exist upon removal of the overlay. And then as you can see, the allowed uses, that being assisted living facilities, multifamily, mixed use, multifamily workforce, not mixed use, recreation, religious facilities, and retail sales, professional office, again, either being permitted by right or CUP. So similar scenario in the 28 area. There are about 32 acres that are underutilized, totaling 10 lots. Again, these are would be in the commercial 1 and 2 zoning districts. So again, that's an indication that this overlay is not allowing for, I think, what we would like to see going forward in terms of redevelopment. It's more prohibitive than helpful in these instances. So like I mentioned, we used our GIS system to break down each individual parcel to give you an indication at the parcel level, individual parcel level, about what's developed, what's underutilized, what's utilized to its maximum potential. I'm happy to answer specific questions about the parcels. I don't think it's beneficial for me to read every single parcel. But I'm happy to answer questions
We can
about
do
that.
that, and I think anyone is interested can, is this gonna be on our webpage so people can go look at it?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. And I think I find it most helpful to give examples of instances where these districts haven't worked, since we're trying to propose removal of them. So most recently, you'll recall the 215 Rockingham Road project. That's the 16-unit multifamily development that the board approved. So that's in the 28 overlay district. That particular project is actually 2 parcels which are now merged. That project had to undergo relief or receive relief specific to the overlay dimensional requirements that were imposed on the property. If they didn't get that relief or have items waived in that regard, the project likely wouldn't have happened. That's a perfect example of a good redevelopment of a property that was able to get through the process, but it was not very streamlined, it was not necessarily smooth, and that was a direct result of having the 28 overlay district in place. There are other examples of parcels that haven't come forward with a proposal yet that have that same potential, and so I think that what I've heard from the board and others is that we'd like to allow for that redevelopment to continue to occur, especially in the 28 and 102 overlay areas. I think we've all seen, traveling to Exit 5. It's not the prettiest part of town. That being said, there is potential there. There's potential for that redevelopment to occur, and this is a step in the right direction to allow for that process to happen.
Some good old Americana up there, so.
Excuse me, what did you say, Art? I
What?
missed what you said. What did
Oh, good old Americana.
Well, that's also a means of checks and balances, too.
So,
Okay, you all set in?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Tony?
so, this was a lot of work, that you all did. I don't know who exactly did everything, but this was a lot of work. This is a bunch of hours you have into this thing. And I understand completely what you're trying to do, but I'm totally plugged in. So for the general public, what's wrong with what we have right now? And how does this change affect what we used to have? Just in plain talk. You talked about underutilization, but no one knows what that is except me and you. So, could you help me out with that?
Yes. So the overlay districts imposed additional dimensional requirements. So when I say that, I mean additional landscape buffers, additional setback requirements that directly relate to the height of a building. In addition to those layers of regulation that come with the overlay districts, the parcels that we have to work with in both of these corridors are restricted even further, simply just from a natural standpoint, meaning the ones that are left are wet, they're smaller parcels, and so having that additional dimensional restriction essentially makes them underutilized. It makes it very challenging to develop without significant zoning relief.
So in even plainer talks, I'm gonna go down one more step. So what we have currently in place in our regulations, or whatever it's called, the system that we have in place now makes it very hard for somebody to build anything on. And if they were gonna build something on it, because of all of this stuff that we have built into it, it's gonna make it more expensive. Are those two fair statements?
Potentially,
harder to
yeah.
build, and probably more
I think
expensive.
that's to a certain degree, yes, because I know back in, 2022, that's 2002, around 2000, there were pressures, especially big box stores having interest in 102, especially the Exit 5 area. And members of the public were kind of making demands upon the planning board to have a building moratorium, just to stop all development, period. But, I mean, we had been through growth management before, and the state statutes that deal with growth management only talk about residential growth, not about commercial or industrial growth. So what the planning board thought best was to look at the situation, review what we can do, and there seemed to be at least support, even from some of the landowners at that time, for the POD. You know, it allowed them to do a little more, creativity with development, but the main thing, it did slow things down, and we kind of were looking at a certain appearance and everything to, keep Londonderry looking Londonderry.
So is it,
But it was only going to be temporary,
I
until we got our act together.
temporary was a lot of years.
Yes, 20 years, actually 21 years. to be-
21 years,
To
yeah.
be exact.
So as a result of those two things, harder to build on and therefore more expensive, so the system that we have currently in place also is making it harder for the town to collect revenue on those parcels, or to completely utilize the potential revenue of the parcel, because all the provisions that's on that parcel of land are so restrictive, no one's building on it, or what's being built on it is less than what it could be if we relieved some of these measures. Right?
Correct.
So I-
Underutilized.
Exactly. So by relieving this overlay district, the town of Londonderry has a chance to increase its revenue. Increasing revenue could help with the tax rate.
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna say it can't, it will. I'm saying it can. Could possibly.
Spending is
help.
part of that, the equation there.
Taxes. So, but that's how it's all tied together, right? Are those fair
Right,
statements?
I mean, and I think to your point about, revenue and trying to balance residential and commercial, these areas are primarily, they're commercial,
Commercial.
industrial areas, so
Right.
there are very few lots within these areas that are AR1.
And understand, I understand this. There's a lot of people that are watching right now that have absolutely no idea what this presentation is about. And when they see these slides on the website, they're still not gonna understand it. And so, all I'm trying to do is break it down to common terms to help people understand what it is that's trying to happen here. So, thank you very much. I know this was a lot of work.
It was like trying to explain what we're doing 20 years ago was not an easy task. And all I can say is that times have certainly changed over 20 years. The demands are different upon, growth and development in Londonderry. And I think any investment company in the right mind would not invest in a big box store or shopping malls, that type of thing anymore. It seems to definitely be passé, and some of the articles that I've read about it, it definitely is not in favor. So I think one of the things with government, we're always a step behind the public. The public is doing stuff, and we just merely react to it. And we got way behind on this. It should have been done. We did have an attempt in 19, but it also was going to take the POD off, but also make changes with the actually four commercial zones. And that ended up being very
Yeah,
confusing.
it got too complicated.
Some of the landowners wanted it, some of it didn't, and therefore it kind of left the board as, don't do anything. Let's take another look at it.
I
We
think
never
that-
got around to it till
I
now.
think one of the key points too for the general public is to understand, it was a little bit glossed over, but to understand that the overlay district is on top of the underlying zoning. And when the overlay district is removed, the underlying zoning is still in force. All those rules and regulations and whatever for the underlying zoning is still there.
Yeah.
It's not unzoned, it's just
It's-
a top layer of restrictions is being taken
removed.
off. is being
So this
taken
doesn't
off.
turn into the Wild
Because
West.
with,
It's
Correct.
just- yeah.
yeah.
Correct, it's
With
not,
POD on there, we had to satisfy the requirements of the POD and the underlying zone. So now we take the POD off. I think it just, is much easier to, probably lends their creativity a little bit more on what.
And then just to that same kind of point is that the existing development as it is today also remains there, whether we remove the overlay or not, what exists remains. That's not gonna change in terms of existing structures and development.
In short, it's better for the town. Cut and dry, just like that. I have no problem doing it.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'm all set, Mr. Chair. I think it's important for people to understand what the last thing Tony kind of mentioned on was that there is still zoning there, we're just peeling a layer off. I can understand that with dimensional requirements, there's some really small lots here. Your actual buildable envelope inside of these lots is so small that you can't put a doghouse on it. So I understand it, and thank you, Kelly.
Jason,
This seems reasonable.
Lynn?
Have you solicited any feedback from the property owners on making this change?
Not beyond what I've heard from preliminary meetings from the property owners that have come in for potential development. But through this amendment process, each individual property owner will receive an abutter notice and have the opportunity to attend the hearing and speak.
I'm all set.
Okay, anything else, Tony?
so just to hammer home the point, and the town council has said this on several times, this isn't cast in stone, nothing's been done yet. This is a discussion. There's gonna be public hearings,
Yeah.
yes, and there's gonna be a lot of other discussion that's gonna happen. This is just a workshop where planners are discussing potential.
Step one to get to public input.
Exactly, so,
We gotta get our act together first, so
Right.
then we
But-
can present to the public.
so I just wanna throw that out there, because the phones are gonna be ringing.
Oh, yes. Ian, you have anything else?
No, I'm just talking to myself here, looking at it.
Okay, so what we can, we'll proceed to a public hearing then, which would be the second Wednesday in December, which I believe is December 13th.
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll have a public hearing. We'll solicit the property owners in particular, but there'll also be a regular warning that goes out, the 2-week warning, so, for a public hearing. And we will hold a public hearing. We'll make a recommendation to the town council. The town council will have 2 readings on it. The first reading, they introduce it. The second reading, they will hold a public hearing. So there'll be 2 public hearings on this. Unless we decide to have another public hearing if we make changes to what we are presented, or same with the town council. So we will proceed with a public hearing on this on the 13th of December.